grew out of a conversation that Sam and I had about a year ago, actually, about how we could collaborate and foster conversation on campus about the issues that we often think of as wedge issues, or issues that cause us some discomfort as we're peeling back the surface and looking at what's going on. So we've had some great Cup of Culture events this fall looking at human trafficking and gender stereotypes. And Sam, remind me of the other one. I'm just having one of those brain freezes, but I'm really excited to kick off this year with Alfonso. He's a great partner and is the director of the criminal justice program at the university and a professor of criminal justice. And we'll be giving a little further intro on him in just a minute, but let me kick it to you, Sam, just to say hi, and then I'll do a couple housekeeping things and we'll get going.
Thank you. Can anybody hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Like Kim said, we are super excited to host this event for each and every single one of you. It's been our desire to have these conversations right here on our campus, and I want to say this: these conversations we're having, you know, we're not just having these conversations for this hour and a half and then wash our hands and walk away, right? Our goal is to have these conversations, start the little fires in these little cohorts, and then go into our spaces, go into wherever we come from, and start having these bigger conversations, you know, with our friends, with our families, with our faculty, with our advisors, right? Because I have to let you know, the need to be able to fully understand each other, the need to understand what is going on in the world around us, it's so big and it's a huge need that we don't need to, I keep using the word need, but it's extremely important for us to realize that we have to have this conversation. We have to learn about this. And I'm so excited for this particular topic. I have been a big proponent for prison reform and criminal justice reform. And a lot of us don't know what that means. You know, when we hear criminal justice, when we hear prison reform, we don't know what that means. And I'm so glad that Alfonso here to share with us what that's all about. So like Ken said, what we're doing right now, this was our dream, to have like-minded people come together and share their opinions and share their thoughts about how to make our country better, how to make our society better, right? So this is what we're here to do today. And I don't want to take up too much time because you didn't come in to listen to me. So thank you, Alfonso, for being here. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Rihanna. Thank you, Bella. I know she's here somewhere, who's been working behind the scenes. And I want to give a shout out to the woman that started this event. She's no longer with us. I'm sure she's listening somewhere. By Lauren Wood, came to come up with this idea of cup of culture, and Kimber and I said, yes, let's do it. So we kind of, you know, put the flesh on it, and Kim and her team are kicking butt with it. So I'm super excited that we get to do this and we get to have these conversations with you. Do not let this night be the only night we talk about prison reform. Do not let this night be the only night we talk about these issues. It is hard, it's uncomfortable, it's messy, and it's needed. So thank you for joining us tonight, and I'm gonna hand it over back to Kim.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I don't know. I had a little brain freezer in the moment, but our first event this fall, actually, our first Cup of Culture was called Unpacking Whiteness. It's a really powerful experience. And so what we've been doing in each of the subsequent Cup of Cultural events really is looking at how some of these issues disproportionately affect people of color. And that's very true with our criminal justice system that disproportionately incarcerates people of color. We looked at how human trafficking disproportionately impacts women of color. And so we're gonna peel that back a little bit more tonight around this issue. Two housekeeping things. One, which Rihanna already said in chat, was probably would recommend to put it in speaker view so that you're not distracted by other faces. You can turn your camera off also to help with that. And go ahead and put questions either directly to me in chat, Kim Barry Jones, or to everyone is fine, but I'm going to be collecting those questions throughout the next hour and then helping field them to Alfonso at the end. He runs a very interactive experience, so we may throw some of it in the middle, but just so you know, I'll be managing bringing in the questions and then and then asking them of Alfonso. So we will get to questions. Feel free to send them to me. And with that, I want to kick it off and formally introduce Alfonso Esquer. Like I said, he's the director of our criminal justice program and a professor in the criminal justice program, but he has a really interesting life experiences that he brings to this role. He is a real gift to the university. I was honored to meet him a couple of years ago, and he has a background in the military, but he has a heart for restoration and for restorative justice, and we'll be talking about that tonight. And that's one of the things that really makes Alfonso unique, is the way he blends his life experience with his faith, and how he's taken that now into his work, both as a professor and running this new program at the university, but also in his work with the Rock Church in the prison ministry outreach work he does. So we are going to kick it to you, Alfonso, and I know you're going to show a segment where Alfonso was featured on the Rock Church's Sunday morning TV program called Rock Your City, where it gets into a little more detail about who he is, and then he's going to share with us. And so Alfonso, I'm going to kick it to you.
Thank you so much, Kim. And thank you everybody else who's joined us this evening. I know there's a lot of things going on, and so many other options of what to do with this evening, and you decided to show up and be here. So I just want to say thank you, first of all, for having me. Thank you, Kim. Sam, I think you gave some great points. I think you already covered half of my my presentation in a very limited time, so I just wanted to say thanks. So this subject obviously is pretty complicated. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things that are happening. So I really sat down and kind of just meditated, prayed on what is that we really need to hear. What's the most important factors? There's plenty of facts. There's basically, you could Google all the statistics out there on what's happening within our criminal justice system, and you could hear that. So I won't talk so much about that. We will talk about some facts as they're relevant to really getting down to the core of possibly finding some solutions, at least within ourselves, because it starts within us, right? I could come up with some really big ideas about how the country should do better within our criminal justice system, but it first of all has to start with me. I have to really look inside of myself and really support what I'm doing. And we're going to get a little deeper into this, but it really comes down to, if we want to suggest and give ideas to the criminal justice system, the courts, policing, and corrections, which are the three biggest components of criminal justice, we have to have a total buy-in for what we're proposing. We actually have to have a certain a change in heart, possibly within ourselves, or at least an examination of who we are and why things are happening in our current society. So I'm going to go ahead and share this presentation I just prepared here for us. So we called this the criminal injustice system, and because we know that there's quite a bit of injustice happening. We've seen it because it's began, well, not began, it's been, but I think we're kind of like at our end road, as in the seams are tearing, and society is now asking for more and for change. And we saw that. I know that we saw a big part of it in the beginning of last year in March 2020. We saw major protesting, and then some violence ensued, and a lot of it, destruction, a lot of violence, a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, really just the manifestation of people really trying to communicate what they've felt for years. And so we're seeing that. So we know that there's some change needed, right? So the criminal injustice system, we're not speaking today to be disrespectful to the United States or to the justice system, but when there are changes that are needed, it's good to talk about it. I appreciate Sam's comments that it's good that we get together as people who have a desire to bring change, right? Really, the only way that it's going to happen is through discussions and communication and connections and working together to get this done. There's not one single person that could bring change on this massive scale. So we have to do it together. And so the more we talk about it, the more we become informed, the more effective we are. And so I just want to thank you for allowing me to come and share and just speak. Appreciate the introduction from Kim, but I'll move right into it. Let's see if I could. Okay, so here's, Kim did share a little bit that I am a part of a prison ministry, or I volunteer a good amount of time, or I have, at least before COVID, inside of the prison systems, in the criminal justice system itself, which is part of the prison. There's the county jails, there's also juvenile halls, there's also immigration centers, there's federal prisons and jails, and then there's also population that once they are discharged or released, once they've completed their sentence, then they come back into the communities, and I do work with that population as well. But let me just hit this clip really fast. Kim slightly mentioned that last year, The Rock was given the opportunity by Fox San Diego, Channel 5, Fox 5, to do a segment of several series of shows that were hitting social issues because of, like I mentioned, in the beginning of March through April through May, there was all kinds of things going on within our community and within our society. So then Fox went to Pastor Miles and said, would you like to air some footage, some shows on some of these social issues? So Kim and I were able to be a part of that. And so one of the shows or the segments was the school to prison pipeline. And so I'll just briefly play this video here and you can take a look at it.
As the criminal justice director, I oversee the entire program for criminal justice, as well as our adjunct faculty that teach under the program. I also teach as well. Previous to my employment here with the university, I was involved in law enforcement. I was also a criminal investigator. What I noticed that in my time in law enforcement was that offenders that we would incarcerate became repeat offenders. I began to see the same people over and over. The recidivism rate in the United States is about 80%, meaning that once you've been in prison, you're very likely to return up to 80%. I've now learned through my experience going into the prisons and the juvenile halls and the county jails and connecting with people in community and restoring hope, that's where true transformation occurs. Even the data will show that once somebody has gone through restorative justice programs and has taken on hope through the Word of God, that recidivism rates drop, that they are no longer going to return to prison. There's valid data that shows it is reduced from 80% all the way down to 10 to 15%. And so that led me into becoming a part of a prison ministry with the Rock Church. There I was able to now make a difference in a way that was going to transform lives, rather than just incarcerating men and women, breaking up families, and that I was able to go in and provide restorative justice and hope and bring the message of the gospel to so many people that are incarcerated. And I began to see true transformation. Transformation didn't come through punitive methods, but it came through having received the hope and restoration through the Word of God. He loves them regardless of their behaviors. And he's calling them to a place where they could be restored back to their true nature, identity of who he created them to be. And so my experiences in the prisons, in the detention centers, really opened my eyes. The lenses that I used to see people through changed. I'm reminded by the verse in the gospel, in Matthew chapter 25, it was Jesus speaking to his disciples, and he gave the illustration that when we visit somebody in prison, it's as if we visit Jesus specifically. And that had a huge impact in my life. And my heart transformed to now look at them through the eyes of God, that he loves them. And so I also began to love them as well. One particular gentleman comes to mind. He was incarcerated at Donovan State Prison, and he came into one of our services, and in his eyes I could see a loss of hope. He was very angry. In him. I could see it directly in his eyes and in his demeanor, his words. A man who was very distant and had walls up of pain and hurt. Throughout the weeks of attending the Rock Church services inside of prison, I could see that he began to transform. When he was released, this is a few months ago, he's no longer on probation or parole. He contacted me, and we picked up where we left off, and he is doing well, and he gives all the glory to God for his transformation. The most common need, I would say, is transition assistance. Once they're discharged from prison, once they've completed their sentence, it's very difficult to find their way back into the community. First of all, getting sentenced and going to prison, it's almost as if you're segregated from the community. It's almost as if the community has pushed you out. It's the same concept with the school to prison pipeline. As in our current school systems, where we look to punish students for their behaviors rather than to bring healing or restoration or find out why those factors that cause them to behave in this manner. It's the same way that our current criminal justice system seeks to punish and believe that through punishment that somebody will be transformed or changed.
Are we still here?
Yes, we're still here. At least I am.
Sorry about that. I'm just trying to get rid of this screen here. Let's see. Okay. Oh, we don't want that again. Sorry.
The criminal justice director, I oversee the entire program for criminal justice, as well as our adjunct faculty.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to get back to the presentation. It's not letting me. Let's see.
That teach under the program.
All right, I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm sorry. Please bear with me. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get this going, but it's not working.
Could it possibly be in one of the tabs at the top of your screen?
There we are. Thank you. Okay. Does everybody see the presentation once again?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So what this picture represents here is one of the conferences that we held inside of the prison at Donovan Correctional Facility. I'm there at the right-hand side. So we do this about twice a year, where we have approximately 50 inmates that will be allowed to come into the conference, and we're able to share hope and restorative justice practices. And what I've seen in my experience in the last 5 years doing these type of conferences is I've seen some major transformation like I said in the video, guys will come in and you could just see in their eyes this loss of hope and despair, just this loneliness. And once the conference has concluded, they are fully transformed. And I've seen that with at least, I would say if I had to give a percentage, in the high 95 to 98% of the people that come in experience this. So, and this is through the works of restorative justice. So we're going to get into that here in a little bit. So I just want to give you a little tidbit of what that was. But so this is Donovan Prison. So prior to my beginning with Point Loma Nazarene University, I worked for the Drug Enforcement Administration. Here's just some pictures, some pictures of me doing some, well, the one to the left, I'm carrying a big bundle of marijuana, which probably be about 100 pounds or so. I believe that was just kind of like a dog and pony show. The center one is one of our big seizures. The other one is out in the desert, just performing some of the functions that we would. The reason why I bring this to the table is because a huge part of mass incarceration has to do with the war on drugs. And so it's something to me that I would be called, or that I would begin to function in bringing restoration to those who are incarcerated, when in the past I was doing quite the opposite. And I feel that I'll be able to bring a perspective that I feel is going to help possibly with your thoughts and ideas, and how it's looked at from the inside, from the criminal justice professional, from their perspective. So we could all come up with solutions and ideas on what is the best way to transform our justice system, or we could kind of Monday morning quarterback what certain officers should have done in different situations, as we've seen heavily in mass media and social media and such. But I'm going to provide a perspective on why some of these things are happening, and what it's like to actually be in the justice system that's enforcing the laws, and bring that perspective to the table. I think it's one of the most important ideas. Something that we definitely have to look into is our personal self, as I spoke about earlier, our implicit biases, or the way that we function, or just our societies function with implicit biases. I outlined the definition of attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding and our actions. And often it's done in an unconscious manner. So anybody ever, you don't have to respond, but I'd like you to just reflect in yourself in your own way. Been walking down the street and you see somebody that is different than you, possibly of a different color or race, different gender, possibly mental health disorders, just something that causes them, that makes them different from us. Automatically we have these biases that are often, they're subconscious, where we don't even recognize them. We don't even know that we're thinking of these things. That's what makes it an implicit bias, where we're not thinking, hey, let me attach these thoughts or these feelings to the person that's walking across the street from me. It's just something that we automatically do, because in possibly the training that we've had, our upbringing, different experiences that we've had, the way that you feel, maybe something that somebody told you. Media obviously plays a big role in that, but we all have these biases. Thoughts and feelings are implicit if we are unaware of them or mistaken about their nature. So if we can think about it, if at times we're unaware that we are acting or feeling in a certain way, or even we're mistaken about the nature of those feelings. An example, associating criminality or judgment of someone without even realizing that we're doing it. Anybody ever been at a red light and there's maybe a group of people on the corner, and so you just naturally feel like locking your door? That's a sense of an implicit bias. What's to say that they're going to go and try to unlock your door and cause you harm or steal some of your property or whatever that is? It's those implicit biases. Some of them may be healthy and some of them not so healthy. So my response to the implicit biases is really mindset, is for us to really look into ourselves, reflect, and think about, well, what is my mindset? Why do I have these thoughts towards certain people? What makes that person threatening to me? Do I have any evidence, anything tangible, or any credible evidence that this person is going to harm me? So we naturally begin to feel something, right? Those are those implicit biases. So in myself, coming from a law enforcement background, I've developed definitely some implicit biases that where they were shaped by what I saw on a normal day, by my peers. Working in law enforcement, you hear, just the communication that's held within, that type group. Law enforcement is a very tight-knit group. So when they're sharing, they feel that there's trust in that circle. Our mindset truly is what is really the core of beginning this social change within our criminal justice system. Since this is such an important topic, this implicit bias, like I said at the beginning when we first started, I said we could all have great ideas and solutions on how to change our justice system, but it has to really start with us first, and then it begins to expand to others. I want to give you a visual video example of an implicit bias. And so I'm going to play one other short video here.
I didn't want to hear, but it's all good.
Really?
We've been together our whole lives, Star. We got time. Huh?
All eyes on me. All eyes on me. You know what? I bet you got this. You don't know who to trust. So many player hating niggas.
Damn, what did I do?
I don't know. Khalil, put your hands on the dash where you can see them. Khalil, put your hands on the dash. I'm not playing.
Sorry, we ain't done nothing. Will we drive like 50 feet?
Please. Please, just do it.
Sir, can you roll your window?
Where'd you find her? I know her. That's my friend. Score. Yo, come on. Keep your hands on the car. Do not move. Are you okay? You all right?
Go back where he told you.
You're gonna take your time doing whatever you gotta do.
I'm not playing. Go back.
Yo, but come on, why are you messing up my car?
Just listen to him, Khalil.
All right, chill. Stop right there! Stop! No.
Officer needs help. Shots fired. One suspect down. The other in custody. Requesting ambulance.
What did you do? What did you do?
Be quiet, ma'am.
Help him!
Stay where you are. Do not move, okay?
He's bleeding. Help him, God! He's bleeding.
Where is it? Where's the weapon? Okay, the gun. Where is it?
What gun?
Where? Shit!
Shit! Come on, look at me. Come on, look at me. Come on, look at me. Look at me. Come on, look at me. I'm right here. You're okay, all right? There's the ambulance coming. Can you hear it? It's coming. It's going to take care of you. You're going to be fine, all right? You're going to be okay. Don't be scared. Come on. Look at me. Look at me. Come on.
Could anybody identify the implicit bias in there? Again, there's no need to answer. You might want to ask maybe after, or talk. We could talk about it more. But occurs when the stereotypes influence automatic brain processing. In this situation here, the officer had a few seconds possibly to respond. He probably saw or thought that he saw a weapon when he saw the comb. But if there are stereotypes that are influencing his biases, he is more apprehensible to use deadly force or shoot somebody who is unarmed. If those stereotypes or those implicit biases don't exist, it's unlikely that this situation would happen. It's really just becoming aware. Let's move into the school to prison pipeline. I know this was one of the themes that we wanted to discuss. And if you're familiar with it, we're going to continue to expand, but the school to prison pipeline is really I guess in a summary, is to funnel students or young people directly into the prison system based on many factors. One of the top factors out there is the zero tolerance policy. I'm sure many of you are aware of it, but it was originated close to 40 years ago, where because of certain situations, they began to get really tough in the school system about no tolerance for certain crimes. And really those crimes were really just about students bringing weapons to school. But what happened from that policy was that administrators and teachers began to revert to that and begin to suspend and cast out students from the school based on many different violations that were not a part of what it was originally designed for. Somebody that would bring a weapon to school is a major offense. But what we saw was that there was many students that were being suspended and expelled based on truancies or even possibly bringing drugs to school. Many different violations that were not typically worthy of getting expelled or suspended from school. And this outcome, once somebody's suspended or expelled, then the probability of them getting into the criminal justice system increases. Schools also began to outsource discipline to the juvenile courts and officers through the use of school resource officers. So in San Diego County, we have many schools that have the student or the school resource officers embedded within the schools. The trouble with this, well, there's positives and there's negatives. The negative side to it is that if, let's say two students get into an altercation, they assault each other, get in a fight, something like that. Well, those students will generally now go to the SRO, the resource officer, which means that they now are, they open up a criminal case. So somebody who's a juvenile now has a criminal record, and making it very difficult for them to progress in a positive way. Racial disparities. Black students are suspended or expelled 3 times more frequently than white students. So there's data out there. It shows 16% population to a 31% arrest. So 16% of our current school system, of African American students, 16% of them, but they make up 31% of the arrests of those schools. So we see this disproportionate arrest factor for students of color. 97% of school suspensions were the choice of the school administrators. So again, I say that they began to suspend and kick students out of school when they really didn't need to. There was possibly a misunderstanding or there was no connection there with the student, so they were able to use the zero tolerance policy to be able to remove the student, now putting that student into a very negative place. Only 3% of students had broken rules that made suspension a required punishment. And this is current data that you could, like I said, you could find. Students who are disciplined by schools are also more likely to end up in the juvenile justice system. And once that happens, then they are a part of this bigger system. Now they're a part of the criminal injustice machine. Here's a great little table that we could look at about where most youth are placed once they get into that juvenile system. Most students or most juveniles are not in the juvenile hall system because of violent crimes. If you'll look to the furthest left, confined youth, 52,000, juvenile justice system, and you can see all the different categories for why they end up in the justice system. Once they are in that justice system, statistics and the data will show that they're more likely, and disproportionately, minorities are more likely than to return to some form of detention at some point in their lives. So this now leads into the mass incarceration problem that we're having. The American criminal justice system holds almost 2.3 million people. The United States is the world leader in incarceration. 2.3 million, that's in the United States, that's around the 5th or 6th biggest city. If we could put all of the people who are incarcerated into one city, it would amount to about 2.3 million people. That's a lot of people. There's some staggering facts out there. 5% of the world's population is within the United States, but 25% of those people who are incarcerated are in our prison systems. That is a huge number to consider. 500% increase over the last 40 years. So what's brought this drastic increase? 500% over the last 40 years. So let's go back to 40 years. That's in the 1980s, really beginning in the 70s, into the 80s, into the 90s. But the 80s really had its share of tough on crime era. There was a time where we wanted to get really tough on crime, and so we felt that by increasing the strength of our laws and deterrence would reduce our crime rate. But we know now, statistically, with the data that we have, that it's not happening. Most of this increase is based on the changes in the law and policy, not changes in crime rate. Because we have to logically ask ourselves, well, if we have 2.3 million people incarcerated and we have a 500% increase, then that must mean that people are committing crimes at a higher rate or on a bigger scale. But really, it's based on the changes in the laws and policies. It's more difficult now, but disproportionately, we're seeing that people who are within poor communities, and people of color are being disproportionately sent to prison at completely higher rates than those that are not. So how many people are locked up in the United States? We know that there's over 2 million, but this gives you an outline of where they're placed. State prisons, local jails, federal prisons and jails, and they're also in different immigration holdings. We also have private jails, which are for profit, that we'll talk about. But a large number are in the local jails. What happens is that we will put somebody in a jail, like the county jail, San Diego County, or if we're talking about San Diego County, and they're going to wait for they're there on pretrial status, waiting for their trial or waiting for their disposition in court. High rates, high percentages of people who are in jail, county jail, waiting for their for trial, will be released. We could see, I believe, next slide. Here it gives you an idea of where and why people are in jail. So that means that if somebody's sitting in jail, in the county jail, that means that the government or a government authority has accused a person of a crime. Then they go to the county jail awaiting their disposition, meaning they're still innocent, right? They're innocent until proven guilty. So they may sit in there for some time, and somebody could sit in the county jail for up to a year and still not have gone to court. The injustice is that the way that the jail system is set up, the county jail system is set up, is that the wealthy individuals are able to pay their way out of the county jail, so they're able to pay to go free, and it discriminates on the basis of that wealth. So those that don't have the money to pay to bond out of jail, then they have to remain in jail until their trial comes up. That's the commercial bail industry. It's money-based rather than risk-based. So if you don't have the money to bail your way out of jail, then you're stuck. Really, the justice system was created to mitigate the risk. If there's a violent offender, if there's somebody that is not able to be within our communities, our society, because of their threatening nature, then we would want them to be in jail awaiting their disposition into prison. But we see now that it's money-based. The current system disproportionately entraps the poor, minorities, and the vulnerable. We're seeing high numbers of persons with mental health disorders that are stuck in the jail system because they don't have the means or the knowledge on how to fight their case or to be released from jail because they don't have money. What are the harms that this causes? It's this reciprocal cycle, right? Loss of jobs. If somebody gets arrested and they get put into jail, you're probably going to lose your job if you don't show up for several days, right? You might lose your home, custody of your children. Then that just leads into this cycle of crime in order to survive. This is our current jail system. So mass incarceration has not touched all communities equally. And this is where we're really looking at the disproportionate amount of African Americans and people of color, Latinos, that are being incarcerated at higher rates than people who are white or other races. People of color make up 37% of the US population, only 67% of the prison population. African Americans are more likely than white Americans to be arrested. Then once arrested, they're more likely to be convicted. And once convicted, they're more likely to face stiff sentences. There's valid data that shows these numbers. Black men are 6 times as likely to be incarcerated as white men. And Hispanic men are more than twice as likely to be incarcerated as non-Hispanic white men. So what are some of the factors? Why is this happening? Why are there these racial disparities? As previously mentioned, the sentencing policies and the implicit racial biases and the socioeconomic inequity. Now, one subject that we do need to touch on, because it does have a very significant role in the number of people that are currently in prison, is the war on drugs. We talked about in the last 40 years, we've seen a 500% increase. A big portion of that came because of the war on drugs. And myself, being a former DEA agent, one that was enforcing the drug laws of the United States, I have direct experience in this, in that I felt, as I'll just be truthful and honest, that I had to become at one point a creative writer. I really had to articulate what I wrote in my reports. That's what was what asked of me by my superiors, by my boss, as in the Drug Enforcement Administration or the FBI. They're funded by a budget that is passed down through Congress based on our reports, based on the need, based on how much we show that there's a need to stop the drug, to continue fighting this drug war. So this drug war caused a skyrocket of drug-related convictions. So again, from the 1980s, there were 40,000 people in prison. To 2017, now we're looking at 452,000 people. So we can see how there's obvious connections between in this side of this drug war. There was also an implementation of mandatory minimum sentencing laws, which forced a judge to hand down a minimum prison sentence based on charges that a prosecutor brings towards the defendant. What this means is that there's certain laws that the judge has no say in what they could assign as a sentence. If you think about that, that means that if somebody commits a drug-related crime, those minimum mandatory sentences have to be applied to the person regardless of the circumstances. So factors for why that crime was committed is not really looked at. Their hands are tied. So judges currently have the ability to use discretion to assign a sentence that is appropriate to the crime, something that we would consider justice. Minimum mandatory sentencing removed that, and now you're given a sentence regardless of the circumstances or factors or what level or what role you played in that crime. So if we want to really look at that as an example, let's say somebody who's a drug user, or somebody is in possession of drugs because, well, first of all, according to the mental health diagnosis, the DSM, or basically the mental health Bible, it talks about drug addiction, alcohol addictions are disorders, no different, or a disease, no different than if somebody who had diabetes or cancer. So with the minimum mandatory sentencing, regardless if you had that disease and you were caused, or that disease led you to be a part of possessing drugs or even selling drugs because of your disease to be able to maintain your disease, judges no longer have the discretion to be able to change sentencing guidelines. So they would have to allow the prosecutor to convict, and then they were sentenced to very high sentences. So the majority of crimes, or the majority of cases that go to court, end up or result in a plea deal. 97% of cases end up in a plea deal. Prosecutors will use that high mandatory minimum sentence as leverage for somebody, or for most, to plead guilty in most cases. So if you think about the purpose of our justice system, it's so that we could have fair and appropriate justice. But if 97% of cases are pleading out, they're not being heard by a jury of their peers. They're not being looked at or determined by a judge who could assign a fair and appropriate sentence, they're going to plea deals. So many people are receiving these plea deals based on fear. And I truly believe that there's a lot of innocent people that possibly are taking the plea deals based on fear. So my experience in the prison system, as I've been in there providing hope and restorative justice and such, I've had the opportunity to truly connect with many of the inmates and residents of the prisons. And there's some, I remember this one gentleman who said, I'm out in 1 week. I'm getting out of prison in 1 week. But I just want to let you know, he said, I just served a 7-year sentence because the minimum mandatory had me in such fear, meaning he could have taken a 20-year sentence had he gone to trial and lost, or he could have taken the 7-year plea that he ended up taking. And he said, but let me tell you the truth. He goes, I have no reason to lie anymore, or to you. And he says, I really didn't do that. I didn't do what they said I did, but I'd rather do 7 years than possibly face a 20-year sentence. And so this is what we're encountering within our criminal justice system. So these laws take away from a judge the opportunity to use discretion or to reduce sentences to fit the circumstances. And that's where we're noticing a large spike in numbers of people in prison. I'm going to quickly touch on the 3 theories of the criminal justice system. These are the primary. There's many different ideas out there, but these are really the 3 traditional theories that are out there, and really what our justice system is currently founded on, which is the first, which is the retributive justice, emphasizes punishment rather than rehabilitation. It argues that the response to crime should be proportional to the offense, and the threat of punishment serves as the most effective deterrent to crime. It really makes me think about an eye for an eye, if we're talking about biblical terms. If somebody who commits a murder should be killed according to this theory. Currently, we function strongly by deterrence and through harsh punishment in crimes and high sentences. Really, this is the model of what we're looking at currently, which is the reason why it's not working very well. Then there is the restorative justice model, or the theory. And what this is it focuses on how to heal the harm caused by crime. It advocates for the rehabilitation of offenders through reconciliation with the victims and the community affected by the crime. So really it looks deeper into why is somebody involved in crime? And it goes deeper than that, where in a typical crime that occurs, the victim is not allowed to be heard. They don't have any say inside of the court process. They will never receive any type of healing. They won't be able to be heard. Restorative justice brings the victim, and it's really victim-centered, as well as then it goes to the offender and expands out to the community and those that are affected or harmed by the situation that occurred. If you think about it, if in any relationship that you may have had, or in a situation where you've had a conflict with somebody, if the other person, the person who committed the harm towards yourself, if that person really just accepted accountability and responsibility for their actions and maybe just apologized, depending on how severe, obviously, the harm, that could have brought healing and reconciliation between that relationship. And it doesn't even have to be a relationship that continues to persist, but it could be one that when those two persons go their separate ways, at least they have found reconciliation within themselves and rehabilitation. We have to consider that the majority, at least 95% of the people who are in prison currently, are going to return to our communities. But if we're going to continue to function on in the manner that we're currently enforcing and functioning within our criminal justice system, people will come back to our communities but not be restored, and only with more aggression, and only having been in a society that's been very tough and isolated and away from connection. So they're coming back in a negative form rather than a restored justice. The last one is a transformative justice, and we're going to hear a little bit more about that from just somebody else that's going to share about that, but I'll quickly just share what transformative justice is. It offers a structural approach that analyzes the social condition in which crimes happen, the reasons for victimization, the need for restitution, and the establishment or restoration of peace and security. It definitely goes deeper into why certain crimes exist. So here's a quick description of what restorative justice is. It's really a paradigm shift. I believe in the beginning 2 or 3 slides, we talked about the implicit biases. Restorative justice looks to bring a paradigm shift. It's really a change of the way that we see others, the way that we see our criminal justice system. The traditional discipline, in the same manner that we're currently functioning in our justice system, the offender goes before the authority, the figure who asks, what rule was broken? What offense happened? Was it an assault? Was it a crime was? And then ask, what's the punishment? What's the consequences for this? For breaking the rule. And then usually removes the offender from the situation, right? Incarcerates them. That's why we have such a high incarceration rate. The restorative justice model looks to the person who caused harm, meets with all affected, engaging with group to answer what harm was caused, what happened, what must happen to make things right, heal that harm. And then it holds the person accountable and empowers him or her to make things right as much as possible. So when they return to the community, they have accepted that accountability and been able to become empowered and become productive citizens within our community, as well as feel good about themselves and continue to progress. This is a picture of one of the restorative justice circles that we hold inside of the prison system. This is what it looks like. There's restorative justice is often practiced through circle groups and different talk groups and connections, and really getting to the root of accountability and looking at the factors of why it was that those harms were committed. So this is just an example of that, but I know I'm getting close or short on time, so I'm going to play this last video about restorative justice and how it can actually change mass incarceration. And then we'll have some time for questions, but let me play this last video for you.
I'd like you to recall a time when you were really hurt by another person. Maybe physically, maybe they lied to you or broke your trust. Maybe they stole something from you or put their interests ahead of yours. In that moment and the weeks and the months following, what was it that you really wanted? What would have actually made you feel better? So in years of asking this question to my students, to justice professionals in courtrooms and prisons, and to victims of crime, a handful of people have told me, honestly, it would have made me feel better to key their car. But not many. Actually, nearly all of us want the same thing. You want them to look you in the eye, acknowledge what happened, and maybe, if it's genuine, apologize. And you want a chance to explain how they've impacted your life and see them really get it. You want answers to some questions so you can stop trying to figure out how this happened, how you could have protected yourself better, and whether you can trust someone again. It's important to know that these are not things our justice system offers crime victims. In fact, there are all sorts of real and symbolic barriers that prevent people who cause harm from being accountable to the people they hurt. The first thing they hear is, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be held against you in a court of law. In other words, don't apologize and don't take accountability because you might jeopardize your legal case. For crime victims, the most consistent ways to participate in the justice process are a private consultation with the DA or reading a statement during sentencing. You may have no interaction with the offender whatsoever. They may not even be allowed to make eye contact with you in the courtroom. In most states, incarcerated people aren't allowed contact with victims and their family members, even if they both request it. So maybe we could accept some of these failures if our justice system worked in other ways. And by worked, I mean kept people on the outside safe and changed people on the inside for the better. But our justice system utterly fails everyone it touches. Not a surprise, right? In prison, people get hurt instead of helped. And no matter how strict we get, no matter how much control that we exert, 50 to 70% of people who leave prison are back within 3 years. The communities most with the highest rates of incarceration, poor communities of color, actually have more stress, trauma, mental illness. I could go on and on. Instead, I want to talk to you about restorative justice, a surprising approach that might offer better outcomes for victims, offenders, and the communities they live in. And I want to suggest that in order for it to work, we all have to do our part. Now, restorative justice is not a new idea. Some people say it's the most common approach to justice across the world and throughout time, but that somewhere along the way, we forgot how to do it. It's a philosophy that says getting justice means repairing harm. In restorative justice, repairing harm happens through face-to-face dialogues between the people harmed and the people responsible. For instance, here in Colorado, hundreds of cases are diverted from the courts each year through restorative conferences that bring together victims, offenders, and affected community members to agree on how to repair harms after a property crime or an assault. For example, someone who vandalized a local business might agree to repaint the wall themselves. Someone who caused a car accident might agree to pay the victim's medical bills. And sometimes agreements are symbolic, like writing a letter of apology, doing a service project, or volunteering with the victim's favorite charity. But the goal of these agreements and the whole process is always to meet the needs that were created by the crime and to facilitate direct accountability. I am not saying that restorative justice is the answer to every criminal case or all the complex problems with the criminal justice system. And I want to be clear that victims should always have a choice about if and when they meet someone that harmed them. But what I am saying is that this is a transformative approach that can be used far more often than we may believe. And studies of Colorado's diversion programs show that 95% of both victims and offenders are satisfied with the process, and that offenders have a recidivism rate of just 8%. This is a select group of cases, but it's also an enormous difference. And this is what a system designed to keep people safe should be doing: healing victims and preventing harm. So if restorative justice works so well, why isn't it the basis for our current justice system? It's a great question. And it's why I started out my career studying why some states were adopting restorative justice into their state codes and others weren't. And I was actually surprised to find that most states have adopted legislation that supports the use of restorative justice in criminal cases, but that these policies are rarely put into practice by prosecutors, judges, and correctional officials. What I learned when I talked with these potential change agents is that they were either skeptical about restorative justice or they just didn't understand how it fit in their roles. In other words, they either don't wanna or they don't know how. See, restorative justice, face-to-face dialogue about crime, conflict, pain, suffering, it's incredibly difficult, not just for justice professionals, for all of us. I teach a class on restorative justice, and my first reaction to conflict is to hide in my office and avoid eye contact with my email account. I once engineered an elaborate game of phone tag that went on for weeks, just by, like calling at the time when you knew the person wouldn't pick up, just to avoid a difficult conversation. These are silly little examples of our very serious pain. My theory is that isolation is our default response to crime because it's actually our default response to conflict. We block, we ghost, we cancel the people who hurt us, and we overuse prison, not because we actually think it makes things better, but because we're afraid of being hurt and we don't know what else to do. We want accountability, but we don't want to have the hard conversations that it requires. We'd rather believe there's a simple solution that can keep us safe and protect us from pain. It's easy to feel that mass incarceration is something done to us by politicians, police, prosecutors, and prison guards. But it's important to remember that it's something we invest in each time we build virtual and physical walls between ourselves and others. As a result of our inability to face those we hurt and those who hurt us, we participate, knowingly or unknowingly, in systems of control and isolation. Our policy problem is a people problem. The good news is, restorative justice offers a people solution. It teaches us that what changes our choices is actually not laws. Otherwise, the drug war would be all wrapped up, right? It's actually coming face to face, realizing that we've hurt someone and being willing to make amends. Similarly, if we want to change the criminal justice system, we have to face each other, take responsibility for our roles in mass incarceration, and do what we can to repair the harm. That's why innovative prosecutors, yes, they exist, creative correctional administrators, committed legislators, even researchers like me, are increasingly coming together to have these hard conversations. We're listening to the people who are most impacted, incarcerated people, their families, crime victims, and survivors, and we're designing solutions together that we can all agree on. My experience with restorative justice tells me that the solutions we forge together are far more powerful than the ones we hand down from the safety of our courtrooms and our offices. And I believe this is a restorative movement that can transform the way we think about doing justice. But it will take more than those of us working in the justice system to transform it. It will actually take all of us, because real criminal justice reform will never happen until we face our fear of facing each other. It's a really hard thing to do, but I know we can do it because I see incredible, courageous examples in my work all the time. Not long ago, I sat at a little round table in the prison visiting area with the wife and the daughter of a man killed in a robbery and the person serving life without parole for his murder. The victim's family brought this little hardbound notebook filled with all their unanswered questions, all the things they wanted to tell this man about their lives and what they had lost. And I watched as they led this beautiful, really heartbreaking, but empowering dialogue. And for 6 hours, I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Yes, because we had prepared for this moment for months, but mostly because they had the wisdom. The innate human wisdom to say what needs to be said and to do what needs to be done to further our own healing and that of our communities. And you have that wisdom too. We all have the wisdom and the skill and the compassion to restore ourselves to ourselves, not through isolation, but through connection. Thank you.
Very good, right? So here's just a few solutions that came out of what the data is showing that could actually bring prominent solutions through using restorative justice. But again, just like the speaker spoke here a minute ago, really comes through connections, looking to ourselves within our heart. Since we are a Christian university, I always like to refer to data, research, as well as biblical perspectives. And it's really just Romans chapter 12, verse 2. No longer conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that's really what a change that's what will really bring change within our communities, is that transformation of the mind, the way that we see each other. A lot of these things may have been brought through or been passed down by historical negativities or by social media or just mass media in general. But it's really a condition of looking within ourselves into that implicit bias. So we could open it up for questions. I think there's some in the chat. Kim, if you'd like to come back on as well, I'll stop sharing. And we also have, I believe, somebody else that is going to be sharing something.
Yes, that's perfect segue. Alfonso, I want to have Charisma de los Reyes show her beautiful face. She is teaching a course at the university this semester for the very first time on transformative justice. So, and she is a great ally and friend of mine. And so she's going to just share briefly a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alfonso, for that. I mean, you know, there was so much, I was like jotting down so many things that you shared and the videos that you shared. And thank you for having the transformative justice definition with the 3 theories. And so it's exactly that the class, we're looking at these social conditions, right? How do these crimes happen even in the first place, and what needs are trying to be met when the crime is committed? So, right, you talked about like poverty, the issues of substance abuse. And so in, you know, not to take up too much time, but like really thinking about like this semester, we're focusing on child sexual abuse, right? And the larger system of the child welfare or the child protection system, and how communities of color, families of color get funneled, like you said, get funneled into the child welfare system, and how surveillance, you know, even just having one contact with the child welfare system can set up a family for generations to come. That will funnel their children into juvenile justice, that will then sadly funnel them into the adult criminal system. And so therefore, right, you see this intergenerational impact of what in the beginning was true concern, right, for the child's well-being. But like you said, how policies and practices and implicit bias all come together. And these are all human beings, right? I'm a social worker. You were a former law enforcement agent, and the training that we receive. But when our eyes are opened to really what the human condition is and the role of social conditions and, you know, all of these things, that it's not at this very individual level, that it's just choices that people make. But I like to think about, well, the choices that were offered, were those real choices, or did the person have to make a choice of no choices to survive, to get maybe their most basic needs met, right? And so sometimes the choice is, do my kids go hungry again for 24, 48 hours, or do I walk into a Walmart and shove some food into my pockets, right? And maybe what I stole was less than $25, but now because of the way policies and laws are set up, thieving is thieving is thieving. I'm going to jail. My kids are being taken into the system, right? And so you can just see how this domino effect happens when there is a choice of no choices, or these very difficult choices that need to be made. And so what we're exploring is, what are these conditions? Does the law fit the condition? Yes, the law fits the crime, but what was the need that was trying to be met? And so, you know, in all this, like, I'm getting super excited, right? Because the class just started on this Monday, but we're really looking at these systems, and make no doubt, these systems are doing exactly what they were made to do. But what we want to interrogate, are there alternatives? There needs to be a different way of thinking. And so what you're talking about, and there's also this question of, is it good enough to reform, or do we need to abolish? And then if we want to abolish, do you do that all at once, or is it necessary, right, the incremental change? Because these systems have been in place and they're huge, almost too big to fail, right? So, I mean, you know, so these are just things that we're exploring, but really taking it not just at this individual level of restoration, but true transformation at the macro levels, and really taking a look at these policies and these unintended consequences that come along with it, but that affect communities and generations, right? For a long time. And so that's just a little bit of what our transformative justice class. And so this semester we're looking at, you know, child sexual abuse and child welfare. And hopefully, if it's successful and we can continue to carry on this class, we can hopefully partner, Alfonso, and really look at, you know, prison reform and really start to dismantle and interrogate the prison to school pipeline. Thank you for letting me share.
Yes, I've been telling Alfonso about you, so I love that you got to meet on this.
Yes.
I got some ideas for you with some conversations I've been having with the city attorney for both of you. So,
okay.
But let me jump to questions. We only have 9 minutes. We have 4 questions, so that's going to give you less than 2 minutes a question, Alfonso. But first question is, what are your thoughts on eliminating the cash bail system? What do you think would be a better solution?
Well, that is a great question, and it's something that's been looked at for some time. I actually was refreshing myself on that specific topic. Back in the 60s, there was like this act that was passed that anybody arrested or accused of a crime should be able to bond their way out or pay their way out. But then when we look at socially communities that are economically challenged, and the communities that are mostly being impacted by arrests and by accusations of crimes, are now being put into the system, into the jail, and they can't afford to be released because I'm not sure about anybody else, but unless you're sitting on $10,000, you know, in your savings account, and at any moment you could be accused of a crime, you're going to sit inside of that jail for some time. And then but we also have to consider that bail bonds industry is huge, just like our correctional industry is billions of dollars in funding and, you know, in our economy, and how many jobs are given through our correctional system. So if I had to just give you a quick answer, should we get rid of it? I think it should be looked at on a case by case, circumstantial by person scenario. Really, the bail situation or the bail model was really to keep those that are high risk offenders inside of jail while they're awaiting their trial. I think the majority of people who are arrested don't have to sit in jail when they could be productive out there. So really what we're doing is we're hurting our own self. If we arrest somebody and then put them in jail for X amount of time, whether it be 3 days to 3 months, that person is no longer being a contributor to his family, to society, to themselves. They're really now, they're degrading our communities, right? So, and that's where we see the majority of our people who are arrested, that they're sitting in this place only because they can't afford to get out. Not necessarily because they're violent or because they're high risk or because they should be there, because they're also innocent, right? Right. Until proven guilty. So I would say, I should say that the majority should not have to stay there, but it should be looked at circumstantially based on a fit that's appropriate for that person.
And we are starting to see some movement on that. I know in California, we're starting to see some movement around bail, which is encouraging.
There's been legislation out there, SB 10. It was brought up, legislation came up, but it didn't make the votes. But there's also some underlying factors that there's big money, billion-dollar industries that no longer have clients, just like we didn't get to it because there's so many moving parts in the justice system, but just like private jails, private prisons, if you're keeping somebody incarcerated based on profit, again, ethically, is it justice? I don't know, but any company that really functions for the purposes of profit, then profit will be their priority, obviously. Right. So they're not any extracurricular activities, education, resources, any of that they could cut out, even food. If they could cut those things out, then that means more profit to them. And if they're already stating that they're functioning for the sake of profit, well, then we have to consider these are going to be things that are going to be happening there. But okay, I know we're short on time.
Right. And to Charisma's point, the system is actually doing exactly what it was set up to do. And that's a great illustration. When you set the system up for profit, it's going to fight any change that eliminates that profit. Okay, we've got 4 minutes, so we have 2 more questions we're going to cover. I love the ending one, but I'm going to kick this one to you first. And that is, many of the schools and districts embrace restorative practices. I know Charisma actually is at the San Diego County Office of Ed. Are there any exceptional schools, districts, or programs that you know of, and how might this impact the school to prison pipeline? So how are we trying to interrupt this, or are we at all in schools right now?
So gratefully, San Diego County Unified School District is one of the innovators of districts that is actually implementing restorative practices into their school districts. I was at a conference at UC Berkeley, not just last year before COVID and all, and they were trying to adapt the model that San Diego County Unified School District is using. So you're in the right place. If you're in San Diego County, this is kind of like the hub of restorative justice. It's just, for some reason, we're just blessed to where we could actually, there's many institutions. I know the prisons are doing it, the county jails, the juvenile halls, the school districts are now moving to a restorative practice because they're following the research and the data that shows that they're getting better results from students that are being able to remain in school and just spending a little bit more time to look at the factors of why it is that they're possibly misbehaving or whatever that is. And then through restorative practices, they're able to assist. So yeah, you're in the right place. San Diego County's school district is doing it.
That's great to hear. And this is such a great closing question. This is from a criminal justice student, but I think it would apply to all students. But the question is, how do we, as criminal justice students, how can we start making an impact that would benefit future generations?
I mentioned a few times, I think it has to start definitely within ourselves. Then once we've reflected within ourselves and at least recognize and reflect on our personal implicit biases. Because we all have them. A lot of times we didn't ask for the the way that we think or feel starts with us, then we could partner with agencies that are moving in those type of practices. But I will say, implementing a restorative justice model into policing or into the courts, that it's going to take buy-in from the top, from from the leaders. The field workers may support it, but unless the leaders are enforcing it or let the field workers know that, hey, this is something that we support, it's going to be very difficult. And that's why we haven't been able to truly move into this model yet. But it'll take buy-in. I think with time and with more education, and the more that we continue to do our parts, I feel that it'll become, I think more people will learn about it and see that it's something that could be effective and very useful to transform our justice system.
Great. Well, thank you. And as you know, Alfonso, and all of us recognize in doing this kind of a hour-and-a-half event is that we're just scratching the surface. But that's what's great about dialogue and conversation, is we can continue it. So like Sam said at the top, we are hoping that this is going to spark conversation, spark connection, spark collaboration. And then Cup of Culture is looking at, moving forward, how do we just keep taking a deeper dive into these topics? So we're really grateful for your time this evening, Alfonso, and really thankful to all of you who took the time out of your schedules to carve out an hour-and-a-half to join us this evening. And we will be following up tonight's event with a link to the conversation and some other resources that we will provide, including the links to the videos, so you can watch for that, pass that along. Those of you, I know we have several professors here, so just know that you'll be getting access to those resources. We'd love to see you share them out with your classes during this J term. And with that, we will close it out. We are just right on time. So thanks again, Alfonso. We're so grateful for you and so glad to have you on the Point Loma team, and proud of you for the work that you're doing and the way you represent us and the way you walk and live out your faith every day is really inspiring, I know, to me and to those who get to work with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Kim. And for everyone else who attended, thank you so much for being interested in this, in such an important topic.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Good night. Have a great evening. Stay safe. Keep the faith. Can't give up. Keep the hope. Good night.
Thank you.